The sun was hot on her neck. The track felt rough beneath her blade. Elaine Turner stood alone in lane 4, 76 years old, one leg, and the weight of 1,000 doubts clinging to her shoulders. She closed her eyes, not to pray, but to remember the falls, the laughter, the questions no one dared ask out loud. Why is she even trying? The crowd had gone still. Even the air held its breath. She whispered 3 words to herself. Just one more. Then, bang! The starter pistol cracked through the silence, and the woman no one expected took flight. She was 76, a grandmother, a widow, and an amputee. Most people assumed her best years were behind her, that she'd spend her days in a rocking chair, telling stories from the past. But Elaine Turner had no interest in fading quietly, because one morning she laced up a single running shoe, strapped on her prosthetic leg, and stepped onto the track with a fire in her chest and a whisper in her heart. Not yet. She didn't train in a fancy gym. She didn't have a personal coach or a team. She trained alone, with scraped knees, quiet mornings, and a stopwatch from 1983. And yet, she crossed the finish line faster than any woman her age, with one leg in the history of the sport. What pushed her to defy age, gravity, and every odd? What made her risk pain and failure when most would have stayed safe? And what did she whisper, breathless, teary-eyed, as the world watched her rewrite what was possible? The answer might just change how you see aging, loss, and the power of one final race. Before she was a record breaker, Elaine was lightning. That's what Frank called her. You don't just walk into a room, he'd say with a grin, you charge it. They met in 1968 on a gravel track behind the old high school. Frank was the volunteer timekeeper. Elaine was the only woman trying out for the local running club. She didn't win that day, but she outran every expectation. He was her biggest fan, her loudest cheer, and her soft place to land. They were married 42 years, raised a family, danced in kitchens, laughed through loss. When Frank passed, Elaine stopped running, stopped racing, stopped charging, until one quiet afternoon, while sorting through old boxes in the attic, she found his stopwatch. Still set to 000, she held it in her hands like a heartbeat, like he was telling her, start again. That night she didn't sleep. She sat at the table and whispered to the empty kitchen, if you were here, you'd say I could still do it. And maybe, just maybe, he still was. Before the world ever called her disabled, before prosthetics, walkers, or whispered pity, Elaine ran barefoot through dirt fields in Georgia, skinny legs, scraped knees, and a laugh that outran the wind. She wasn't the fastest, but she ran like she belonged to the earth. Every stride was rebellion. Every breath was a song. In 5th grade, the boys at school told her to sit out the race. They said it was just for them. She ran anyway. No starting gun, no whistle, just a girl in her Sunday shoes, flying across the playground while teachers shouted in the background. She didn't just win, she soared. That night, she came home with a ribbon made from notebook paper. Her mom taped it to the fridge, and her dad whispered, some girls grow up to be women. You were born a comet. It was the first time she felt power in her legs, not just to move, but to prove something. Decades later, with a blade instead of bone, a track instead of a field. Elaine was chasing that same feeling, not the win, not the glory, just the freedom. And though she'd forgotten it for a while, That barefoot girl was still inside her. Elaine didn't train like a champion. She trained like a beginner, a stubborn, hurting, determined beginner. Every morning before the sun crested over the oak trees, she rolled out of bed, sat at the edge for a full minute, just breathing, then reached for her prosthetic leg. She gave it a name, Grace, because some days that's what she needed more than strength. She started with balance drills, holding onto the back of her kitchen chair for dear life, counting out loud, 1, 2, 3, until her body remembered that it still belonged to her. Her living room became a gym. She filled tote bags with canned tomatoes for weight training, placed masking tape on the floor to simulate lanes, and used her hallway as a sprint zone, 10 steps forward, 10 steps back. Every night she logged her progress in a $1 spiral notebook, her handwriting shaky but proud. Today, 14 meters without stopping. Tomorrow, 15 degrees. She fell often, sometimes in the hallway, once outside in front of teenagers riding bikes. They laughed. Then they helped her up, and the next day, they showed up to jog with her. Word spread through town. People honked as they passed her walking the track. A local librarian gifted her a pair of running gloves. A physical therapist offered to adjust her blade for free. One afternoon, the high school track coach brought her a whistle. "You're more consistent than my varsity team," he joked. She didn't laugh. She was too busy practicing her starts. And yet, beneath all that progress, the stopwatch on her kitchen counter still blinked 000, reminding her. She still hadn't completed a full 100-meter sprint, not without falling. But she wasn't chasing perfection. She was chasing possible. A week before the big race, Elaine fell, hard. She'd been practicing a new start position, trying to shave half a second off her time, when her prosthetic caught the edge of the track. She slammed into the ground, skin torn, rib bruised, pride shaken. At the hospital, the doctor looked concerned. "You need rest," he said. "Not records." She nodded politely. Then, when he left the room, she whispered to herself, "I've rested long enough." The night before the race, Elaine couldn't sleep. Her running blade sat beside her bed like a silent promise. She clutched her husband's old stopwatch, still set to 000. She thought about quitting, about disappointing the kids who believed in her, about letting the world see her fail. Then she thought of her granddaughter, the one who had asked, "Nana, can you still race me?" And she got up. Race day was hot. The track shimmered under the summer sun. Spectators fanned themselves. Officials shuffled papers. And lane 4 was empty until Elaine walked onto the track. Some gasped, others cheered. A few just stared in disbelief. She wore a plain white tee, running shorts, and a homemade race bib with one word scribbled on it in Sharpie: "Still." At the start line, she shook, not from nerves, but from knowing what this moment meant. The starter raised his pistol, a pause, a silence, then bang! Elaine launched forward. Every step was effort, her arms pumping, her blade whistling against the track. Children screamed her name. Strangers cried into their phones. One woman whispered, "She's really doing it." Halfway in, her balance wavered. Her left foot caught a groove. The world tilted, but she didn't fall. She roared, and when she crossed the finish line, arms outstretched, sweat pouring, teeth gritted, the clock read 19.74 seconds. Silence. Then, an eruption. Elaine Turner, 76 years old, amputee, widow, grandmother, had just broken a world record, not because she was fast, but because she never stopped moving forward. As reporters gathered, one asked, "How did you do it?" She smiled breathless and said, "I didn't run to break a record. I ran to break a belief." After the roar of the crowd, after the cameras flashed and the announcer cried into his mic, Elaine found herself alone in the locker room, still in her sweat-soaked white tee, still trembling, but not from exhaustion, from awe. Her race bib, creased and handmade, sat on the bench beside her. She reached down, unclipped her prosthetic leg, and stretched out the one that remained. For the first time in years, she felt whole, not because she'd crossed the finish line, but because she'd crossed something deeper, a fear, a memory, a limit. She opened her duffel bag and pulled out the old stopwatch, Frank's stopwatch, the one that had waited quietly for over a decade. She clicked it. 000 became 19.74, and for the first time, she didn't cry. She smiled because she knew he would have been in the stands, yelling louder than anyone. Suddenly, a knock at the door. It was her granddaughter, eyes wide, cheeks flushed, holding a bouquet wrapped in newspaper. "Nana," she whispered, "you didn't just race me. You raced the world." Elaine laughed, then pulled her in close and whispered back, "And you made me believe I could." Elaine thought her story ended at the finish line, but sometimes the most powerful victories echo long after the cheering stops. A week after her race, a group of women in her town, all over 60, started meeting at the local park every morning. They called themselves the Second Wind Club. They didn't run fast, some didn't run at all, but they moved because she did. One of them had battled breast cancer. Another had arthritis so bad she needed 2 canes. But together they shuffled, strolled, and smiled their way through the same track where Elaine made history. At a nearby school, a 6th grade girl who'd been bullied for her limp stood up during morning announcements and said, "If Elaine Turner can race the world, I can raise my hand in class." The principal added a new sign near the gym. "Courage doesn't come from winning. It comes from showing up anyway." A prosthetics company asked if they could name their next blade model after her. She politely declined. Instead, she donated the money to a scholarship fund for young amputees who wanted to chase dreams no one else could see yet. Her story was featured in a documentary, but she never watched it. When asked why, she said, "Because I already know how it ends, with someone else starting their first step." Let's hear what others said about Elaine, those who watched her rise and felt something shift inside themselves. Her daughter said, "After Dad died, I thought I lost both of them. But when she ran that race, I saw the girl he fell in love with again." One teen track star said, "I trained 6 days a week." She trained with soup cans and sidewalk cracks. And somehow, she runs with more heart than all of us. Her granddaughter said, "When I tell my friends my Nana's a world record holder, they think I'm joking. But when I show them the video, they cry every time." Her physical therapist said, "From a clinical perspective, her balance and muscle recovery defied logic. But sometimes, spirit beats science." Coach Jackson from the local high school said, "I've coached for 22 years. She's the toughest athlete I've ever seen. No ego, no excuses, just grit." And from a letter read aloud in a whisper, "Dear Elaine, I'm 67. I haven't left my house in months, but I saw your story, and today I walked to the mailbox for the first time. I just wanted you to know your race isn't over. It's just changing shoes." She didn't just break a record, she cracked something open in all of us. A month after the race, Elaine walked alone to the sidewalk where it all began. The same curb, the same crack, the one that took her leg and nearly her spirit. She stood there, blade on one side, bone on the other, watching the wind stir the autumn leaves. There was no crowd, no cameras, just the sound of her breath, steady and calm. She reached down, touched the pavement, and whispered, "Thank you. Not for the pain, but for the awakening, because without the fall, there would have been no rise." She turned and with slow, deliberate steps walked forward, not fast, not flawless, but free. As she disappeared down the street, a voice called out from a porch nearby. A little girl, maybe 7 years old. "Hey, are you that runner lady?" Elaine smiled, turned her head, and said, "I still am." If Elaine's story stirred something in you, don't let it stop here. Share this video with someone who thinks their moment has passed, someone who needs to remember it's never too late to rise. Leave a comment for the strongest woman you know, or write a message to your future self, the one who just needs one more reason to try. And if you believe the world needs more stories like this, of courage, resilience, and people who keep going when no one's watching, subscribe to Able in every way. Because the race isn't always about finishing first. Sometimes it's about daring to start at all.